Okay, and I'm hoping everyone can see that well.
It's looking good.
Good to see you all, and thank you all for coming virtually. It's good to see so many old friends, some who I've seen recently, and some who I see once every couple of years. Lovely to see you, Rosemary. I see your granddaughter all the time, but it's nice to see the rest of the family for a change. So I'm happy to have a chance to talk about this, what you call a public history project, I guess. And in fact, it's a really simple project that anyone can do. All you need is about $10,000 so you can hire 3 amazing research assistants, and about 15,000 First World War postcards to sift through, and you can literally do it in your basement. So it's a great thing to do for anybody. Just a bit of the background first. I've been collecting postcards for a long time, many years, because I'm interested in the medium. A lot of collectors will collect postcards for the images. And of course, you do get wonderful old images, particularly postcards that are not professionally printed lithography, but smaller scale, real photo postcards, that sort of thing. So I enjoy the images too, but I've always been perhaps more interested in the messages. And I've been interested in the postcard as a means of communication. Means of communication like this. To Dear Daddy from Edda, sent in 1915 to a father who was about to go overseas to serve in the 28th Battalion from Manitoba. The postcard, I didn't put the other side up, but the postcard is captioned, Daddy Come Home. And I'm pleased to report that in this case, Daddy actually did come home. Private Evans came back at the end of the war and saw his family again. But I like the messages on postcards because they are very personal, they're very immediate, they're very often very succinct. Before the text message, before the email, before the telephone, the postcard was how you communicated quickly and cheaply with friends, family, or anyone else. In most jurisdictions, it cost the equivalent of a penny to buy the stamp, probably a penny to buy the postcard as well. In most cities, you could get same-day delivery if you posted it in the morning. Oftentimes, you could get next-day delivery, say, across a large part of the province. So it was far more convenient and reliable than the postal system allows us to be today with mailing things. It was very public in that the postcard obviously didn't come with an envelope. So anyone who handled it could read it if they wanted to. But I would say it was also private because I've hardly ever seen any evidence that people did read it, other people's postcards, when they passed through their hands. So it's probably exactly a little more private than we might imagine. And people used the postcard to send messages ranging from the life-changing to the mundane. So everything from mother took sick and died yesterday to I left my shoes on the back porch, can you bring them in, sort of thing. It's a really wonderful window into the world in that time period. And that kind of communication was particularly important in wartime. The mail became the lifeline for people in uniform and their families, their means of remaining connected. And it put an enormous strain on postal systems. The post office in Britain, from 1914 to 1919, handled literally billions of items every year, the volume growing massively because of the war effort. This is a picture of one of the postal depots at the end of the war. This depot, which was just one of many, this one served just the Western Front, and you can see if you can read the signs, everything's divided by unit. So that's how they organize things. A depot like this probably handled 2 billion letters and over 110, 120 million parcels over the war years. And it's estimated that in a typical week, the British Post Office, which handled all mail coming out of the Western Front, regardless of where it was going, the British Post Office handled roughly 12 million letters a week to and from soldiers. So that's a big responsibility they had. A lot of these were letters, but in between letters, the postcard offered a means of quick reassurance for anxious loved ones. And it's very common to see someone write in their message, "I don't have time to write a letter now, so I'm just sending this postcard." It's a way to remain caught up between letters. So messages can often be quite rushed and quite brief. So just a line to let you know that I'm sailing today. Write again when I get across from your brother. Very little attention paid to censorship at this time, and not revealing military information like when convoys of troops were leaving. So you see a lot of postcards like this where the messages just dashed off and popped in the box to tell someone what's happening. All the way from that end of the spectrum to postcards that are marvels of tiny writing, as someone obviously tries to cram as many words as possible onto this single square of cardboard. So it's a remarkable medium. And it was a medium of its time. The heyday was sort of the 1890s to the 1920s. After people started to get telephones, the postcard ceased to be used for everyday communication, and it becomes a kind of holiday thing. But at the time of the First World War, it is very much an everyday communication medium. So this project that we put in train this year, I'm really proud of the collection of postcards we have. I bore my students with it all the time, and I'm notorious in the department for being able to relate virtually every subject back to postcards. And then I thought to myself a couple of years ago, wouldn't it be fun to bore more people with it? Maybe I could bore a wider audience with my postcard collection. And as I kind of sorted it over in my head, I started to wonder what would happen if we could take these old postcards that had been through the mail once during the First World War and put them through the mail again to the same addresses that had originally received them, to maybe complete the journey or do another journey, or however you want to put it. And maybe we could do this at around Remembrance Day, to use these postcards to bring messages from the past, and in the process to encourage people to think about their own connections to the two world wars generally, but the First World War particularly. First World War is now over a century ago. To people my students' age, it may as well have been 1,000 years ago. What I wanted to do with this project is to show that it's not actually that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And our world today is still not very different from the world that was inhabited by the generation of 1914. So this seemed to be a way to draw that connection that we're all too likely to forget in a lot of cases. So that was the genesis of the idea. And I had this idea a few years ago. And it occurred to me right off the bat that it was going to require a fair bit of work. And I didn't have the research students who could help me do it, who had the right combination of personal qualities, who I thought would allow me to do this the way I wanted to do it. But this past summer, I had the opportunity, I was enormously lucky to hire 3 students who were just perfect for the work. 3 very different young women, but all really, really bright and really, really committed and engaged. And I had taught them before, so I knew them well enough to know that they would take the project seriously, and that I could trust them with my my beloved postcards. And I was right; they were fabulous. They worked so hard for most of the summer. I was away a lot of the summer on with family obligations, so they were left working in the collection. They were terrific. They embraced the challenge. They embraced the idea behind it, and I think for them it became every bit as personal as it was for me. So I wanted to put them up at the screen here because a lot of the most of the hard work that's behind this project is down to them. They're the kind of backbone of it. Anyways, so what I want to do is give you a run through of the process to show you how it worked, just in case you want to try it yourself, because it's fun. So we had in the collection a whole bunch of what would typically be regarded as tourist postcards, with images on the front of scenes or places or things that the soldiers would have seen, commercial postcards of war scenes, whatever. I'll show you some of those in a minute. We also had a lot of photographs of soldiers, not all of which were in postcard form. But very early in the process, we decided that we would include in this project photos of soldiers. If we could determine where they were living when they enlisted, we would reproduce a copy of their portrait photograph and send it to the house they had lived in 1914, 15, 16, whatever. So we had 2 kinds of postcards going out: the portraits of soldiers, and also the more normal postcards that were actually sent through the mail during the war. And they were all reproduced as postcards. When we talked about this at the beginning, originally we talked about sending them in envelopes, so that we could add a little more detail, so that we could say more about the people of the place or the situation or whatever. Eventually, we decided against that because we were sending them to the addresses without knowing who lived there, and they would all be addressed to resident or occupant. And I mean, maybe you would have the same response as I usually do. If you get a piece of mail that's addressed to occupant, it typically goes right in the recycling bin. So we didn't want our postcards to end up in the recycling bin. So we decided to skip the envelopes and send them through the mail as postcards, which seemed much more appropriate. So the first step in this whole deal was going through the collection that I've put together at the university, which is altogether about 15,000 postcards and photographs from the First World War that I've been putting together over about 20 years or so. And we had to first isolate all of the postcards or photos for which we could identify the individual, the soldier or the nurse who wrote it. And there's a lot where we haven't been able to identify them yet, because people, if you're writing to your mother, for example, you tend not to put your last name because your mother knows who that is. And if your mother's widowed and remarried, then she will have a different last name than you. So there's a lot of difficulty in identifying postcards. So taking out the ones that were identified took out a lot of them. Then we had to deal with the issue of quality. A lot of these postcards have survived really well. They're in good shape, even having been through a war and survived for a century. But some of them have really suffered. And they need vast amounts of digital work to even make them readable. This one looked almost blank when I first acquired it, but by fiddling around with it, I was able to figure out what it said. But it's not suitable to send out. So we couldn't do much with ones like this. The next important thing is we have to make sure that the address to which the postcard was originally sent still existed. And for that, we needed a street address. So this one would not have been a candidate anyways. And this was, I'm not sure it was the biggest part of the operation, but it was pretty significant because we basically went through Google Street View and plugged in every address for which we had a potential postcard just to see what was there now. It wasn't foolproof because it's not constantly updated, but it was the best we could do. And that revealed how many homes that had existed in 1914 are no longer there, particularly in big cities, urban renewal. Lots of streets, lots of entire neighborhoods have disappeared. So we had a lot from Toronto. Well, during the First World War, a great deal of downtown Toronto was residential housing, street after street of working class row housing. That's all gone. If you know Ottawa, the area, Le Breton Flats, where the Canadian War Museum is, time of the First World War, that was working class housing. That's all gone. Even the streets are gone. Halifax, the explosion in 1917 wiped out all sorts of neighborhoods. So those streets were not necessarily rebuilt. We had terrible trouble in Montreal because streets being renamed to remove the English language name and change it to a French name. And it's not always easy to find out the equivalence. And I often wondered whether that was intentional on the part of the municipal government of Montreal, but there we are. It was okay for us if the house had been turned into a business or some other kind of institution. And we mailed postcards to dentist offices and a St. Vincent de Paul thrift store in St. Catharines and an office of the National Ballet in Toronto. So as long as there was still something going on in the same building that existed in 1915 when the soldier lived there, that was good for us. And that postcard would move ahead to the next stage of the possible stage of the process. There were a lot of other postcards that for various reasons were disqualified. Sometimes we had this, which was sent to a Canadian soldier in a convalescent hospital in the UK. It was easy to find out all about Corporal Porter, but there was no point in mailing it to Hillingdon House, and even to mail it to the address that Corporal Porter lived in when he enlisted was really not. It was reaching a little bit, so we avoided that. All the ones like that. So we're getting through the process of narrowing down to the postcards we can use. And once we've picked out the ones where the building that's addressed to still exists, then we had to go through and see if the postcard was suitable in other respects. So, and here's something that my students always complain about when they research postcards, the handwriting. Because cursive writing is not taught anymore, although it's been brought back. My students anyways have not been taught to read cursive writing. Even quite neat and tidy cursive writing, like on this postcard, looks to them like so much chicken scratch. Even so, there are certain postcards that are unusually difficult to read, like this one. And this soldier, I have a bunch from this soldier who, when he was writing home, used this a late Victorian technique called crossing, in which you write your letter in two directions, and so you can get twice as much text on it. Which, if you're used to the person's handwriting, you can get through it quite easily. But if you're not, it looks like a whole bunch of intertwined spider webs. So that sort of thing, those sorts of postcards we removed. Was there enough empty space on the postcard for us to add our own little text boxes. And I'll talk a bit shortly about what we wanted to add. Could we fit in the elements that we wanted to fit in? And connect with that, was it relatively neatly canceled so that it was suitable for digital editing, so we could make it acceptable to the post office? So this is one that we had to turn down because the censor mark goes over the address. It's easy enough to remove the censor mark, but in doing so, you lose a part of the address. And even if you take off, if you can deal with the triangular censor mark, there's not really much space for us to put whatever else we wanted to put in the way of identification. So this narrowed the field even further. Once we had a series of postcards that we thought were eligible for use, it was time to research the soldiers who had sent them, to see what their wars were like, to see what sort of details we can include. We didn't have a lot of space to play with, really, as you'll see in a few minutes. Couple of sentences, maybe one sentence. There's not much we can fit in. But we did want to know at least, or we wanted to tell the current homeowner if the writer had survived. Did they come home to this house after the war, or did they never come back? Or if there was anything else remarkable that we could squeeze in. But again, given what we wanted to include, we really had very little space. And that was the one argument in favor of using envelopes. We could have added a second card which had much more detail on it, but I still think it was the right decision to mail them out as postcards as they had originally been. So while the research into the soldiers was going on, the postcards themselves were being digitally prepared. And I want to show you a couple of examples of how that process worked. So here's a very typical one that was ticked all the boxes for us. It was perfect in that there was enough blank space that we could use after it had been digitally altered. The stamp and the cancellation were quite tidy. The handwriting's reasonable. It did all that we wanted it to do. So in terms of the editing, it's all done in actually an old version of Photoshop, and I am the farthest thing from an expert in this. So the manipulation I did was really basic, but it served the purpose. And all I wanted to do was turn this original postcard into something we could mail that looked like that. So it was just a matter of digitally covering over what we didn't want there, which left us space to add our little paragraph and other bits and pieces, and still retained the essence, the important parts of the individual postcard. Here's another example, and this one goes into the third slide, shows the last step. So here's another one which was sent to an address on Murray Street in Hamilton. This was one that we struggled with a bit, not because of the postcard, but because of the story behind it. So the soldier who wrote this, Challoner, came back before the war ended, but very badly wounded, and took his own life in 1921, I think. We weren't sure whether we wanted to put that out there. It's obviously a sensitive subject, much more sensitive for some people than others, but we debated a lot as to whether we should just forget about this one. Ultimately, we decided that this is a real consequence of war, and there's no point in pretending it didn't happen, or brushing it away. And so we went ahead with this one. So the first step, again, was to do the digital editing. to take off the elements that we didn't want. So we've taken off not only the stamp and the cancellation, but also the large postcard printing at the top, just to give us more space to include what we wanted to include. And then the third step was adding those other bits and pieces. So we added the resident above the address. We put in the postal code, a little blurb at the bottom indicating the collection that it comes from, and our affiliation with wartimecanada.ca, which is our educational website. I wanted to have my email there so people could contact me. And we also had a QR code. And this was a bit tricky because anytime you do anything in Western, they want their name on it. And so we didn't want to clutter up the card by having a QR code in one place and the Western logo in somewhere else. But my brilliant administrator in the office found a supplier who could do a QR code with Western logo inside it. And so that's what we did, and it worked out really well. So in this case, we moved the little paragraph of biography onto the front of the postcard. We tried not to have everything on the backside. We didn't want things to look really cluttered. And then it was just a matter of actually we had a real problem finding suitable stamps. In 2003, Canada Post did some really nice poppy stamps. I think it was 2003, maybe 13. Nothing else on them, just a poppy. And they were terrific. And I literally drove around London to every post that I could think of, because you can't phone these places, but don't get me started on the post office. And seeing if they had any in the back room. Finally, I got almost enough. There was another really nice stamp commemorating Valor Road in Winnipeg, where 3 Victoria Cross winners lived. So we used some of those. But the poppy stamp looked really good. It was really effective. And then this one was, once we got the stamp on it, this was ready to go. With the portraits of soldiers, the process was a little different. We still did the same research because we wanted to add the same biographical details. And in some cases, the photo had to be digitally enhanced to improve the image quality. We not too much, though. We didn't want to lose the feel of an old photograph. We didn't want people to think they were looking at a modern kind of high-def digital reproduction. We wanted the in some cases, the imperfections of the old photographs. Although, as you'll see, some of these old photographs are remarkably sharp and clear, and put some modern equipment to shame. So we had the little Remembrance Day 2023 at the top, and a tiny poppy to draw people's attention to it. And because typically these portrait photos, because they weren't as postcards, there wasn't anything on the back, so we had the back to play with. So we created a standard back image or layout, which had on it the little biography, and this is about all that we wanted to put on, and a Canadian General Service badge there in the background. Same other elements: the resident at the address, the acknowledgements, and the QR code. I also want to say that the our alumni donor is a guy named Lee Smith, who lives in Florida now, and he was a varsity athlete at Western, who, when he graduated, he went into pharmaceuticals, I think, and did very well for himself. And the story that I heard is that Western was after him for years to make donations to varsity sports, and he just wasn't very interested. But they found out he was interested in military history, and when he found out he could support that, he's been incredibly generous over 15, 20 years. And so he actually provided a lot of the funding that allowed us to do this project and others like it. So I give a huge vote of thanks to Lee Smith and his late wife Lois, who died 6 or 8 years ago. So all this was done in Photoshop. Then we simply imported them into PowerPoint to size them appropriately for the postcard stock. We just bought postcard stock on Staples or Amazon or something, and printed them. And oddly enough, the printing was actually the most annoying, irritating part of the process. Because so we used very heavy postcard stock, the heaviest we could get in that size, and for that thickness of cardstock, the self feeder on our photocopier didn't work. These were all just photocopied, but we get very good image reproduction quality. What it meant though is I had to load everything up on my computer in my office, then walk down the hall, and the sides of the postcards would print one at a time. So it would chug through and then come out. I'd take the one side and turn it over and feed it back in again. So I spent probably literally days standing on the photocopier, preventing other colleagues from using it as these postcards chug through the system. But it allowed us to control it. We could make changes as soon as they came out. Some of them looked okay on the screen, but when we actually saw the printed copy, the contrast wasn't good enough, the color balance wasn't good enough, so we could fix it right away. If we'd sent them out to graphic services, it would have been a lot of back and forth. So it was definitely the way to go. So when this project came up on Waterdown Memories, the first question I had from people was, are there going to be postcards coming to Waterdown? And the answer, sadly, is no. It's not that I didn't have postcards to use, but villages didn't use street addresses in those days. In most cases, houses didn't have street numbers because there was no purpose for them. People didn't have mail delivery, and so they didn't need a house number. There was no point in having a house number. You went to get your mail at the post office. And in any case, at the time of the First World War, everybody knew where everybody else lived anyways. So you don't need to put someone's house number or even their street because everyone knows where they live. And this was the case across rural Canada. Even in towns which were relatively large. So I'm thinking, now these are areas close to me. So places the size of Woodstock or Ingersoll or Tillsonburg didn't use house numbers for mailing. So they were all off the board. So we couldn't use any of those. So all of our postcards are from major cities. And well, more about that at the end. So these all went out starting at the very end of October. We wanted them to arrive at people's houses after the Remembrance Day TV commercials and stuff had started to gear up, after people started to wear coffees and people's minds turned in that direction, because we figured they would be much more likely to gain attention if people were already thinking about Remembrance Day. We sent them in batches. I mailed them because I'm paranoid. I mailed them in batches at different post offices around the city at different times of the day, just to keep the delivery staggered. I wasn't sure whether this was a wonderful idea that would appeal to everyone, or whether it was just the sort of thing that history nerds would like. And I mean, I asked a lot of people in my department, and they were super keen. But I really wondered what normal people would think. And to our great joy, normal people were just as excited as the four of us had been in putting it together. And we had a huge amount of support from our on-campus publicity people who put together a lovely little short film that I want to show now. It's only a minute or two. But it captures the essence of the project really nicely. It also has a beautiful choral soundtrack by one of our local London choral groups. So let me just muddle around with my screen here and put that on for you for a sec. And okay, so we're going to go that, and we're going to go to that and that. And now you should see a video screen. Does everybody see a video screen? Okay, so this is the little, and I'm Lynn, if for some reason the sound or anything doesn't work, let me know, and I'll start it right away. But it worked before, so it should work now.
These were soldiers, people who served from the Great War. They were writing home. They lived here, in these houses, these neighborhoods, and in our communities. 100 years ago, the postcard was a means of communication. The postcard was the text message. And so messages from the front during the war would be a way for communities to experience together what their men and women in uniform were going through. The original messages on the postcard tended to be very focused on home. How's the car? How's the house? How are the neighbors? Someone who got a postcard from overseas would pass it around, print it out in the local newspaper. Everything was experienced together, the good and the bad. We've been collecting all of these artifacts here at Western University, but not a lot of people get to see it. It struck me that the perfect way to kind of connect the past with the present would be taking some of these old postcards, changing them around a little bit, and sending them out to houses that still existed. We have a little message on each postcard saying who the person was and their experience during the war. When someone gets a card at their home, I'm hoping that they will pause, look at the picture, look at the message, and really think about these were actual people who lived in your house. They walked down your streets, individuals like you and me. What we're doing is just reminding people now in 2023 about the bonds of community and how important it is to rely on the people around you. And if we can capture some of that community spirit, some of that sense of togetherness, I think that'd be a wonderful thing.
So that went out to media outlets across the country. And I was thrilled that these media outlets were just as excited about the project as we were. And in fact, the four of us probably lost 2 entire weeks because of the demand of press. I did the CBC at least 3 times, CTV at least twice, global, syndicated radio shows, newspapers, local media. We had a wonderful write-up on the Hamilton Spectator. So the support we got from the press community was terrific. And it was great to see that maybe this is something that didn't appeal just to history nerds, but to normal people. And then we started to get messages back from the recipients. And it was interesting because the first kind of emotion that they always raised was bewilderment. Why would anyone bother to do this? It seems like a lot of work. Who would do that? And as I went back and forth with some of them, then they began to get curious about the person. Because I think if you, for most people, if you own an old home, you have a natural curiosity about who lived there before. It's a natural human sense of wondering. And so they started to think about who might have lived there. And they started to look around their house and see, well, this wouldn't have been there in 1916, but that probably was, and this has been changed, and that is obviously really old. And so from bewilderment to curiosity, then we got into the enthusiasm. And some people really I mean, they'd be going up to their attic and seeing what, figuring that was most untouched, and kind of going around their house with a fine tooth comb and finding bits and pieces that were as they had been during the war. That was really nice. So we had a lot of really lovely emails from people who had received these postcards and who had never thought about their connection through their home with the First World War. And so in that sense, it was a success in opening their eyes. The messages we got from people who had received a postcard at their home, though, they were swamped by the messages from people who wished they'd received a postcard. Lots and lots of those who had seen this in the news or online or whatever. A lot of messages from people asking if we had specific images of certain people or connected to certain individuals or places. Lots of people emailed to say, "Oh, I wish I lived in an old house, and maybe then I could have gotten a postcard that I could explore." So all in all, it was a huge success. It was really gratifying to find out that people were as touched by this idea as the four of us were. And I was really happy that my three wonderful assistants were able to work on this project that was such a huge success, because public history projects can be a bit hit and miss in terms of actually engaging the public. This one was a big success, and I'm delighted that they were able to experience that. And to do some of the press interviews, and to be that was Bailey Ashton in the little video there, to be interviewed, to be photographed. It was great, and I was super excited to see that. Finally, because I've talked far too long, a lot of people are asking me, well, what are you going to do next year? Well, because all of you will know of my deep personal attachment to Waterdown. We need to do a project that will be targeted at villages and the rural parts of the country. Because remember, in 1914, Canada was overwhelmingly rural. Probably 75% of the population lived in rural settlements. So this was a country of the countryside in 1914. So we're kind of putting together in the very early stages our project for next year, which will target rural Canada. One of my Alejandra has graduated. She's doing her master's degree now in Kingston, so she won't be with us, but I'm hoping that Bailey and Riley will still be, and we'll get a third to help us along. As to the specific details of what we have in mind, those, I'm afraid, are highly confidential. So you'll just have to wait and see. And I can come back next year and tell you what the project looks like once it's underway. So thank you all very much. And if anyone has any questions, I would be delighted to see if I can address them.
There must be some questions. Thank you so much, John. I have a question. One of your first postcards said, sent from HM ship, no charge to be raised. Was that specific to postcards written in transit, or what was that?
No, it's because if you were in a war zone, so on the Western Front, you could send back mail without putting a stamp on it.
Okay.
You didn't have to pay postage. And fairly early in the war, they decided that the ocean, the Atlantic, was a war zone because ships were being torpedoed. So they extended that privilege to people who were transiting the ocean on troop ships. So anything that you sent, wrote on a troop ship or whatever, and put in the mail didn't need a stamp as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan, it's Kim Janjic. Do you
Kim,
hear me?
how are you?
I'm very well, Jock. Thank you very much for coming. I have a question. How many postcards did you send out? And how many of the recipients do you think actually received it and then subsequently responded to you?
That's a good question. We sent out, I think our final total is about 450.
Wow.
To across the country. from Nova Scotia to BC. Of course, Newfoundland wasn't part of Canada at that time, so they got missed. So about 450. Your second question is a good one. We didn't actually there was no mechanism on the card for them to be returned as undeliverable, which is probably something we should have thought about. And it's quite possible that some didn't reach their intended destination for whatever reason. We probably heard from maybe a third, maybe 100 or so people who received the postcards. And in fact, what was interesting is that one of the CBC interviews that we did, they interviewed a guy in Ottawa who hadn't emailed us about receiving the card, but he was super excited about it. So we know that there were lots of people, or probably lots of people, who got a card, but never got around to getting in touch. So there's the other thing we can do is we can track so the QR code allows you to track the number of people who've used that QR code to get to the website. And the stats tell us that over the period of the postcards, about 220 people use that QR code. So probably some people use it more than once, but we would guess that close to half of the people who got a card actually engaged with it in some way. And that's terrific for us.
That's a really good return. How many postcards are in your collection?
I would say there's about 13,000 postcards and probably 2,500 portrait photographs and photographs. And they're all they've all been scanned already, so that part of the job was already done. They're scanned and cataloged. And in fact, some of the people who wrote in and said, "Oh, I wish I'd got a postcard, but I live in a high-rise." Turned out that we did actually have something connected to a relative of theirs, so that worked out really neat. And my wonderful cousin Tish there asked about hearing from someone who had an ancestor or something like that. For anyone who still lives in the family home with their ancestor. Not this time. We expect to have much more of that next year when we do the rural exercise. It's not in bigger cities. It's much rarer to have consistency of residency in families until you get to really high in the social hierarchy. So we didn't have anything like that. We were even hoping we'd get somebody who said, "Oh, my neighbors lived here a long time. I'll have to ask them if they knew the previous occupants." And then, oh yeah, a few days later we did talk to them, and they did know. Didn't hear that, but I'm sure that might have happened once or twice. So stay tuned for next year because I'm betting that will happen.
Did you get any good feedback, or was it mostly, this is very interesting, keep up the good work sort of stuff?
It was a lot of that. There was actually a bunch of people who, and this was also really good, who told me they had postcards and other wartime artifacts kicking around their house, and would I like them? So people have been sending me stuff based on this. I just got an envelope from a guy in Winnipeg, a bunch of postcards sent to his great aunt during the First World War, and he's in a very typical position that his kids really have no interest in that, and he dreads the thought of throwing them out. So he was thrilled to be able to send them to us and have them collected and archived and used and appreciated. So that's been very good for us too, as a kind of outreach to raise awareness of preserving this sort of stuff.
Hi, John. Steve Albury here in Waterdown.
Hi, Steve.
My wife knows you. I don't know, or knows your dad. She was Barbara Black, who
oh yeah,
her dad was Bill Black.
Yep.
I remember him, the sod farmer. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
We live in Waterdown, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so fascinated with this kind of stuff. It almost gives me chills when I would think, if I had a home, which I don't, where a veteran from the First World War was raised. I'm wondering, have you heard or not if any of these people that have these homes, if anyone would be so enthusiastic like me that they might put a plaque or something at the door saying home of a World War One,
Yeah.
veteran with a name there and a date or something. I wonder if, wouldn't that be nice if that happened somewhere?
Oh, that would be terrific. I've had, based on this, so I had a couple of people who got portrait postcards who asked me to send them a high resolution scan so they could print it and get it framed for their family room.
Yeah,
Which I
yeah,
think is really neat. And I
yeah.
had another email from I think it was Sarnia. Somewhere down here, there's a civic project to put up banners of veterans on street poles. And they were asking if I could send them an image, a reproduction of the image that they had, so they could put it forward to the city to go on one of these veterans banners. So that's exactly, that sort of thing is terrific, because then it reaches that many more people.
Right.
So the
And
more the
one other
merrier.
thing I wanted to ask you, it's kind of a little bit similar to the history you've done. Were you aware that Robert Fraser, Dr. Fraser, who's the historian for the Argylls and Southern Highlanders, they've now got a website where they are posting stories of the 19th Battalion
Yeah.
veterans and World War II, but the 19th caught my eyes.
Yeah.
And he had some emails going out for a while where he would provide the history on another soldier that they found. And when I would read them and I would see a Hamilton address, I'd start Googling and going on Google Maps to see where that home was.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of seeing a little bit, if people were reading that and then they somehow found this postcard and associated the two, that would just make it that more enriching. And
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
There was a project done here in London 4 or 5 years ago to mark on a virtual map all the houses that sent soldiers during the war, which you could do in any city.
wow.
But it was really interesting to see where the volunteers clustered. I mean, I know, for example, in Hamilton, there's a street down the East End, Mars Avenue. Oddly enough, Mars, the god of war, which I think sent at least one person from virtually every house on the street.
Oh, wow.
So that sort of mapping is really cool to be able to do as a way to, because it makes things visual in a way that lots of other ways can't.
We have a question in the chat. She wants to know about the postcard with the double writing. I think you called that a crossing postcard.
Oh yes.
Do they write it top to bottom and side to side, or which way, or did it matter, or how did that go?
So typically they write it normally across, as you would, and then they flip it 90 degrees clockwise and write across that way. Occasionally, I think I've seen one where they did that and then they turned it another 45 degrees and wrote on the diagonal on the same space, which does make it virtually impossible to read. But it had gone out of favor a bit by the time of the First World War, but it's very common on late Victorian Edwardian postcards.
Yeah, we have some letters in the archives that are written like that. As
Yeah.
Megan well knows. Just wanted to ask about the virtual mapping of where they came from. And Bob Thomas can maybe speak to this, because we have now First World War veteran files for, I think, just over 600 veterans from Flamborough, of which we are including Dundas. But that seems to be an awful lot of people to have gone from a rural area.
Yeah, it depends on how you, so the list, the database I put together it was divided in half. So there were the group who were actually living in the township when they volunteered.
Right.
And then there was the group that had been born here and were living elsewhere when the war broke out. So it's the same it was the same in the 1920s when people were doing war memorials. It's how big do you want to draw your net? And actually, I just found last week. I just found a new one that I'd never been aware of. A new guy born in Waterdown who enlisted.
Maybe we should send you our spreadsheet, because we've got, like I said, over 600 names now, and it's got listings of where they were from, where they enlisted, and
yeah.
It's grown
after
on
having
the
done this for years and years. I still find new people to add. So.
Yeah.
Gary Campaign here. I can probably add another one. My grandmother's brother was born in Waterdown, listed in Hamilton during the First World War. And I may also have a picture of him standing outside the tent overseas.
And what's the name?
Art Rogers.
Oh yeah.
It's
yes, it's always a bit of a trick to, or I should say, you can never really feel that you've completed your list of volunteers, list of soldiers, because you never get to the end of the resources. It's relatively easy to find the ones who were in the Canadian Expeditionary Force, but there were also probably close to 100,000 Canadian residents who served in other armies, and they're really hard to find. And there's a few we know of from Waterdown already, but there's almost certainly a lot more.
Anybody else have any questions?
Lynn?
Yeah.
Hi, Jonathan. I was just listening to it's Garth Weatherall.
Hi, Garth.
Hi. I was kind of snickered at your comment about people reading the postcards when they go through the postal system. I can tell you from 35 years of experience, we read them. There's been songs written about it in the States and Canada. Yeah, it's just not every single one, but you had time to kill, or you're walking down that street, you were reading them.
Well, I was just going to say that if you're walking around from house to house, you got to do something between houses. So why not?
Yeah, and like I did previous projects like with the Canadian Postal Corps, like when I was overseas there. And then in do you know Caitlin Bailey there at the Vimy Foundation? Yeah, we did I helped produce a video for the Vimy Foundation for their Vimy app.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've ever seen that, and you go in there and you go into the Vimy app, but you can go online, and it's about the Canadian Postal Corps, and it's about cards and letters and the whole
okay,
thing.
I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, well, I helped sort of produce that and get that going. And then if you're going to do anything, I would say future-wise with Canada Post, like I was working with the media and stuff there kind of when I left at Ottawa. If you need any names or whatever to get through to anything, just drop me an email. I can surely poke you. A lot of the people come and go, but most of them are still there.
And in that case, then forget all of my snarky remarks about Canada Post.
No, they deserve them all.
Garth makes some snarky marks every now and then.
If I can just make a comment, Don and Tini, when I was a kid, I was working with my dad, and we dumped off some dirt at a private dumping place. A person was trying to fill in and so on. And while we're there, we noticed there was a lot of household goods and so on. And we sort of went through them, and it was quite interesting and so on, picked up a few. Among what I picked up a small postcard that was sent approximately November 11th, 1918. And it was a card that you couldn't write on. All you could do was cross out. It had 4 or 5 lines saying, yeah, I'm okay, or I hope to be coming soon, or whatever. And you crossed out the ones that didn't apply, and so on. And I just happened to pick that up, and I think it's still around somewhere. But,
Yeah, those were
yeah,
those are referred to as whiz bangs,
yeah.
colloquially.
Well, they didn't have
Um,
to go through the censor.
That's right. And it's interesting. A lot of historians will write that it was an attempt to muzzle the soldiers from saying what they really wanted, were thinking, and it was control, blah blah blah. It was nothing of the sort. It was just to reduce the number of letters that had to be censored. It was simply a practical measure, because you're right. The officers didn't have to censor them. The civil censors didn't look at them. They went straight into delivery. So it was simply a way to, I mean, if you're dealing with 12 million letters a week from soldiers, any number that you can reduce is a victory.
Dr. Vance,
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for stepping up and doing the presentation tonight. A most interesting presentation. It must be fascinating for people that receive the cards to receive a bit of history of their home, but along with that also to promote some remembrance, and for people to remember that, you know, freedom isn't free. There were people that dropped everything and went overseas to fight in the name of our country. And as Lynn mentioned, we've got over 600 files now. Two Bobs did a lot of work over many, many years. I'm just doing a little bit of cleanup now. But what our dream is hopefully to share that with folks like you, and with the Waterdown District High School, with Linden Legion and other local, to say, okay, are we close to getting this correct? And once we reach that point, what our dream is to look at some sort of a memorial, perhaps at the Waterdown Legion, perhaps a book that lists all the names of the people that went overseas, or that joined the forces during World War I from the Flamborough community. So we're looking forward to that. And like you said, they keep coming out of the woodwork. So we think we're getting close, and then all of a sudden someone else drops in a few more names. But we're going to keep working at it.
Keep working. You will. You'll never finish.
No. Well,
at some point, you'll just have to make the decision to stop there.
Sure.
And then as soon as you go to print, the next day you'll get an email from someone saying, "Oh, what about my second cousin twice removed?"
Sure. Well, maybe with the book we can do something that we can add if we have.
There you go.
After, you know, but I really that's our sort of dream, and we think we can get we'll get someone to sponsor to produce that book. And at any rate, again, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
That's a beautiful work you've done, and
well, thank you.
And you and your team are to be congratulated for what you're doing to promote remembrance.
Well, thanks very much. I'll pass that on to them.
Yes. Any more questions?
Hasn't addressed. Very last one.
Okay, Bob.
The question, who that's from, but the Kish Lupin, it looks like. And that person asked, did you hear from anyone who still lives in the family home of their ancestor?
Yeah, I think he answered that earlier.
Yeah, I answered that earlier, but no, I haven't. But I'm very much hoping to with next year's project. So with any luck, the society will invite me back in 12 months' time, and I can answer that in the affirmative and give you a great story about generations of people living in the same house.
All right, you're booked for next October, November. All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you
all very much.
Again. And I hope you have a good evening and a good holiday, and get over that wedding.
Thanks all. Good to see you all.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you.